Welcome to another Living Bridges conversation. Today we're joined by Aya Caspi, who is a longtime supporter of Living Bridges and a very dear friend, and one of the most inspiring people I know. And before I get to why she's inspiring, I'd like to say, just weave in a bit about Living Bridges. Living Bridges is a project that focuses on the value of empathy, collaboration, and compassion, particularly in the context of the social sector, but really for anybody who is socially conscious and wants to make some kind of difference. We offer a learning platform, and over the last 13 months, more than 13 months, we've been able to reach over 780 participants from 44 countries. And this was made possible by friends and fellow trainers who are willing to stand with us. And one of those people is Aya. And Aya is one of the most inspiring people I know. And the reason for this is that her work spans a breadth of different contexts, from individuals and couples and mediations and coaching to working with schools and working in cross-cultural dialogue related situations. So Aya, thank you so much for being here. Why I'm really excited to talk to you is that the workshops you offered for us had to do with NVC, largely internally, spiritually, with the inner work. And yet so much of your work is actually practical, outward, community based. And for me, that intersection is what Living Bridges is really about. So thank you so much for being here today, and welcome.
Thank you, Manasi. It's a pleasure to be here. I just love what you're doing in the world. I admire what you're doing in the world, and I'm very happy to support it as much as I can.
And I want to say that there's been such a degree of support. I find every conversation actually comes with this joy and excitement. So, okay, I'm going to stop gushing and ask you questions so that we can bring our listeners in. So maybe we start a little bit. I know a bit about you, and we've also spoken before. But would you like to maybe share a little bit about yourself and what brought you to NVC, and perhaps particularly about this bridge between the inner and the outer?
Yeah, I was thinking about what you just said about bringing that, spiritual orientation into the embodiment in the world, and the work on social change. And I think that's something that is really characteristic of the way I understand NVC and Marshall as, longing, that, and also what Gandhi did, which was kind of connecting with our heart's longings and soul calling, and then bring it to the world, embody our longing, in the words of Rilke. And so that's what I've been trying to do when I was thinking about what brought me to NVC. My soul brought me to NVC, my soul's quest. And what I mean by that is that, we are all born into this reality where there's a huge gap between what we experience outside of us and inside of us, and what, in a way, our hearts know is possible, in the words of Charles Eisenstein. So there is that gap between the vision of love your neighbor as thyself that I grew up on, everyone's needs matter, the NVC core assumption, tikkun olam, the repair of the world. And so that took me on a quest. I was looking to close that gap, both inside myself, so I can be in integrity with my heart and embody, my values and what matters to me most, which was being loving, peaceful. And then outside of me, of course, growing up in Israel, it's impossible not to experience that gap on a daily basis, just with a lot of conflict and war. And there were many stations in this quest until I was introduced to Nonviolent Communication in the end of 2008, 2 weeks after I arrived to California from Israel. And that was the moment of, I found it, because it was such a, again, practical spirituality, such a practical way to embody in words, in actions, the consciousness of love for self and love for other at the same time.
I find myself very moved by this idea of embodying that longing of my soul, or really living the peace that I'm wanting in my heart. And that really does move me. So I want to talk to you more today about a project that you've done recently, which I find really inspiring. You brought NVC to your son's high school. And speaking as a former teacher, just for a brief window of time in my life, I know that high school can be quite a battlefield. So what was it like to do this, and what made it possible?
So I think it was that kind of longing again to bring to the world around me this consciousness. So my approach has been like, whatever is in front of me, whatever relationships, whatever organizations, whatever opportunities, to try to support this transition into a nonviolent world. And so I have 3 kids, and they're all going to schools. And I had a very painful experience in the educational system that I think I'm traumatized, like many of us, from. And it's been like a journey to meet that system again with my kids. And I've been experiencing, a lot of challenge bringing NVC to schools, because it's quite a radical consciousness. Yeah. And if you take it on, it means that you cannot stay the same. Yeah. Right? It would lead naturally to a whole different system. And so usually, the people that I approach at school, they don't have the power to implement this. And so I didn't have very high expectations when my son started to go to high school at Kadodi. I thought, well, I'm going to meet the principal, just introduce myself, tell him about my work, and see what happens. And he was so excited from the very first moments about everything that came out of my mouth. And I think that was one of the things that really made it work at this particular school, that I had a partner with a structural power who really bought into it and really wanted to see it happen. And so he invited me to a meeting with the staff just a week after our meeting. And I was, again, like anticipating a resistance and cynicism. And to my surprise, none of this happened, which, again, I think kind of like grace. It was a very special circumstances. The day I arrived to the meeting with the teachers, my son, who was a freshman, 9th grader, I met him on campus, and he told me something really bad happened. His girlfriend at the time and him were accused by one of the teachers in PDA, public display of affection, which was a new term to me. And like this whole term of like, it's not okay to display affection was like jarring. And they were called to the principal and, were confronted about it. And especially his girlfriend got into a lot of distress, a lot of shame. And so I'm coming to the teachers meeting with this, just learning about this. So I'm entering the room, and the first thing I said, I just met my son, and this is what he told me. This is what happened today at the school. And I would like to use this situation to model how we would approach it from an NVC point of view. And I just assigned them roles. We started to do a role play. I was playing my son, and I was asking for empathy from them. And they were each having their own positions: the principal, a teacher, a student, the girlfriend. And through this role play, that magic that many times happens when we empathize started to unfold, hearts opening. Yeah. And they started to see, the innocence of just wanting, to have some physical connection and warmth. Yeah. And what's really bad about it, it's not wrong in any way. And if you make it wrong, you can create damage for years to come.
Yeah.
And then there's also, they could see that we're not going to drop everyone, that the teachers also had needs around this, why they didn't like it, right? It may be, you know, stimulating the distraction, or people cannot focus on learning when they see people kissing.
Right.
So we really got to the meaning of what needs, you know, they were trying to attend to, what needs were not attended to, without any sense of wrongness, and people connected with their own shame and child, you know, youth experiences. And after that event, they were sold, because they could really see both the, you know, that there is no learning in how things usually happen, the punishment approach. There's just, you know, disconnection. These kids that felt connection to their school, to the teachers, suddenly they feel disconnected. They don't feel like they're being seen or understood. They have shame and guilt. They disconnect from themselves. Nothing, you know, educational is so then they said, okay, we and what I really liked about it, they said we need to integrate it first before we bring it to the kids. And we started to meet for a staff meeting every Friday, and really used live situations from the classroom, from their school life, to integrate this consciousness. And that was the first year. The second year,
before you go to the second year, I just want to track a couple of these pieces, because for me they're really precious. The first bit I heard you say was that you had a partnership with somebody who held structural power, and there was a buy-in from the very, very top of the hierarchy in that sense, and that was enabling. And the second bit I heard you say was that was about being able to use, and I think I'm tying this up with something you said earlier, being able to use whatever is at your disposal. So you walked in, you had a life situation which could have otherwise been quite triggering, and I'm noticing that it's almost like saying, here's what's available to me, and let me use it in order to still move towards what I want to do. So
I think they were inspired, because they told me that if it would happen to them, they as parents would feel shame.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any of that, and I was able to both hold myself and hold empathy for them, or for whatever triggered them, for the teachers.
Like a modeling of the consciousness, just in how you showed up. And the third bit I heard is also that I heard the word learning, and I'm wondering if there's something about alignment at the level of values, or what is the value of the institution that I'm working with. Being able to at least name that, and then to see whether the old ways of doing things are actually meeting those values, which in this case they were not.
Exactly. I mean, this whole purpose of school is learning, right? To meet that beautiful human need and education, and then asking, does it really happen? The practices we're employing, you know, do they support learning?
Yeah.
You know, they say that every new idea go through 3 phases. One is that people would mock it. The second is that people would resist it. And the third is that you go through an open door. So my sense is that the need right now in our society and in schools and all the system is so dire for something new, for new tools, for new approach, because what we've been using is not working. It's not working, and teachers are in distress, and they are, because they are humans, they're also in distress at their homes as parents, because it's the same thing. So they really integrated it on many levels, and so they were ready to bring it to the classroom, and we decided to align, you know, this project with the principles of nonviolent communication, and not to impose it on students. We created it as choice, and we had enough students who were interested. I think, you know, that actually NVC and this language, because it resonates with life, young people get it really quickly.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel foreign to our bodies, because it's there's so much truth in it.
Yeah.
So we got a bunch of seniors, and for the first half year, I just taught them, and we explored this together. And the second year, they decided to take some projects to bring it to the community, and they decided to teach workshops on empathy, which they created. I just supported them. Yeah. They did the PowerPoints and the exercises. And then they also wanted to create a feedback system, especially about bringing in this piece about appreciation, which I think everyone is so craving for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was intense, because students, for me, what I've seen, that they experience a lot of stress at schools. I mean, a lot of mental health challenges, their peers sometimes being suicidal. So this was like lifeline for them, giving them tools, how to support their peers, how to support themselves, how to understand what's going on for them. I was thinking, like, how come this is not like part of the curriculum? It's just unbelievable, because these are like the basic skills that you would need to thrive in life.
When I came to NVC, one of the first things I said was, why did nobody tell me that I can express myself, and I can check for what my needs are, and my feelings are actually valuable, because it gets me closer to what's actually true for me. And it was,
yes.
Yeah.
And another piece, it's very empowering. I mean, it gave them also power to advocate for themselves. Yeah. So, suddenly they knew how to connect with the teachers in ways that maintain their power, while still being respectful. Yeah. So we did some mediations between students and teachers. And that's really satisfying part for me, how kids get reconnected to the power and learning how to use it with others, as opposed to just imitating what's happening in the systems where, at this age you just rebel. And that's not very choiceful.
No. In a way, I just again want to track a few of the threads that you brought up. One of the things I heard is about these 3 possible stages for anything to come through. And I wonder if what's coming for me is, we have such a situation right now. What we've been doing really is not working. The old structures are not working. And this is something anybody even slightly connected to the field would be experiencing at this point. And I wonder if something about knowing that it's not working, and that level of really coming up against the fact that this is the absolute limit of what the old system can do for us, maybe that encourages like an openness or an open door.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially with COVID hitting, like a year or a year and a half after we started our work, it was, one more thing that just brought that sense of collapse, of we don't know what to do. We need new ways. With just parents, all these conflicts about masks, using masks in school, and kids don't want to use masks, or vaccination, and having to make decisions, policy decisions about safety. It brought a whole new level of complexity. And I actually had, at that time, it was becoming all virtual work, virtual circles for the community, just to sit in empathy with each other and digest what is going on and hold each other. And it was so moving, because the students were crying, but teachers were also crying, and our superintendent was in crisis, mental crisis, from all this craziness.
Absolutely. The sheer pressure of having to hold a position like that would be
so to have this idea of empathy and knowing how to receive this intensity and knowing how to hold students in such distress and how to hold was really life-saving.
Yeah,
it was healing. It really helped us move through this time.
yeah, and to
We
move through it together, because there is capacity to hear each other and willingness to hear each other. What I'm noticing is you're drawing kind of a distinction between an imitative way of learning and an internal reflective way of learning, where I experience life, take it in, um, notice what it does to me, and then come back from within with a different kind of learning. And I'm curious about how much that way of learning impacts this capacity to come together and hold intensity together.
Yeah. Well, I think that, we can hold other people to the degree that we're able to hold ourselves. So what we have known within ourselves, we can meet in others. And if we haven't met it in ourselves, it's going to be really hard to hold others. So this practice of self-connection has been core to this process.
Yeah.
Core, both for the teachers and the students, and really noticing, being present with what's arising in the moment in relation to, the stimuli.
Absolutely.
And that's, of course, is very different from responding from just how you should respond and what you have to do or you should not do, and from protocols or policies. And there was a moment in the film where one of the teachers says, I guess you come to the word human, kind of realizing that there is a disconnection from humanity in the way that we've been responding in these institutions. And this kind of, policies that we come with, like non-display of affection. Teacher was saying, we are requested to leave our humanity at home when we go to work. One of the teachers was sharing an example, like many times teachers deal with, at this age especially, with students, mental breakdown. Students go through things at home, at school, bullying. And then she was saying there was this student there, falling apart, and all my body just wants to move towards her and hug her, but there is all these rules that it's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And then she cannot show what's going on for her.
Yeah.
The teacher is not showing what's really going on for her. So back to your question, I think, yes, it's a whole different process of learning, learning from what's just arising, what's alive, as opposed to just being like a robot following directions or following school policies.
Or imitating what you're seeing and just sort of repeating the older patterns that you're inheriting from grown-ups who just don't know any better. I mean, who haven't had the benefit of learning, say, NVC or something different. I want to come back to that in a moment, but there's something very important in what I just heard you say about becoming kind of robotic within that system. And why that's drawing my awareness is that there is this business of getting an entire system we bring NVC to a system, and the system quite organically changes. But then there's the fact of that system existing within the larger system of other institutions, so while a child might be raised with this empathic awareness and empathy centering in the sense, once they graduate, they would still need to go into some sort of profession, and so many now are becoming really there's not a lot of heart left in so much work now. So I'm curious about how does one navigate that, because it's such a dichotomy.
That actually came up in one of our meetings, when one of the administrators said, I'm worried that we are not preparing our kids to the world around us if we teach them this, very alternative way that is not reflective of what's out there in the world. When we were working on tardiness, when you go to work, you have to be there on time.
Yeah.
So if you are making being late okay, or you're not punishing people for being late, then how will they learn to show up for work at time? And my response to this is first, do you want to teach children to adjust to a system or to a world that doesn't work? Or do you want to teach children to be empowered to become, agents of change?
Yeah.
And agents of transformation, and engage critically and creatively with this reality to actually discover how they can participate in transforming the world? That's one thing. And the other thing is, my sense is actually that it actually empowers them and gives them more capacity to thrive in the world, even as is, because they have more inner resources.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is that the opposite things happens. Like, people think like if you empathize, they see it as permissiveness. Like, if you understand students why they're being late and what their needs are, they might receive it as I'm legitimizing being late. But that's not empathy. Empathy is not agreeing with.
Exactly.
Actually, what happened that when the students were able to hear the impact of being late on the teachers without blame, without making it wrong, really hear the needs that were not met for them. And many times those needs were connected to how they want to contribute to the students.
Yeah.
They were touched. They were moved. There was that human connection.
Yeah.
And as a result, they felt internally motivated, which comes back to that learning from the inside out, internally motivated to contribute to the teachers, to show up in time, to care for this relationship, as opposed to being externally motivated, which is like, avoiding punishment, or which doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's very limited.
Or seeking approval, both of which are pretty much.
Or seeking approval or reward. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And you mentioned in your email to me, Gandhi's saying about, if you want to see a different world, work with the children or work with the young people. And of course, that's for me is very clear, because the way kids are being treated in society, is going to affect their language, their practices, their narratives about life, about themselves. And so that's the opportunity that we have at these years to really impact change by cultivating different set of responses.
It's it's just there's something just so powerful about that when I'm open enough, my heart is open enough, I'm ready to be impacted. I'm ready to own the fact that I have an impact on the other. And to me, that happens with a deep degree of trust that I matter to you. So of course what I do has an impact on you.
Yeah. It's really that question, like, how do you have an impact? How do you make change? And we are taught that you make impact by controlling other people, right? By making them do what you want, by using your power over, by using whatever you have, manipulation, shame, guilt, authority. But then really, I work a lot with parents, and you see, by the time these kids have some physical power and they become inter-adolescents, they just start manifesting the same towards the parents. And so I tell parents and I tell teachers, your impact, your most powerful impact is through connection, through trust. Because when their heart is open to you, they would want to learn from you. They want to have your input. They want to get your advice.
Yeah.
They're going to include you.
Yeah, in their worlds. I love that. That's just so beautiful. They're going to include
it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
after working with the students and them kind of stepping into leadership in the community, we had this very long day about social change and starting to talk about systemic change and how, you know, tomorrow this principal is not going to be in the school, or these teachers are not going to be in the school, and what's going to happen to the project.
Right.
And seeing that we really want to start looking at policies and start shifting things at a system level. And that's when we started to work with the tardiness policy, which was our first kind of case study, which worked amazingly. And
how did that work? Just out of curiosity, how did that unfold?
So they chose it because it was a real like challenge at the school, like in many schools. Students being late, and then there is an impact on the budget.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of motivation to shift that. And again, what they have in place doesn't work, like the punitive policy of a Saturday school. After 4 times of being late, you go to on Saturday, and even though the students, you know, would end up having to do that, it will not change their behavior.
Right. Yeah.
So this is when I will introduce to them convergent facilitation, which is an NVC-based process that Mickey Cashton created for collaborative decision-making. And we started this process where we gathered in one room, parents, administrators, students, teachers, and started to explore the needs behind being late. Like, why do people are late?
Yeah.
And why it works or doesn't work.
Right.
And this is so different from how they usually look at it. Like, you know, there were some teachers or parents who were saying, and you just teach your kids to be on time, and they have to adjust to the world. And but then there was such moving, you know, stories about why students are being late. And you can see in the movie, one of the students is being interviewed about it and her process of shift. She was late, I think, like 12 times a month. And then it just went down after this process so much. And it wasn't like you can make her not being late. She would have to be internally, you know, mobilized.
Yeah.
And she said, after hearing from the teachers and after being heard myself and being understood, I mean, kids sometimes to be at 8 o'clock at school, sometimes they have to drive an hour, and they get up at 5, you know, 5:30 at dark. And just acknowledging this reality, that they have so little choice about it. They have to go to school. It's mandatory. And they have so little meaning, and so little connection with the material they are learning. And so why would they want to be on time? And there is like a sense of rebellion, you know. At least I can be late. So
it's a way of expressing that this is not working for me also.
Right. It's a way to say, you know, this is how I'm exercising my power to disrupt, to resist. And we came up with actually a new policy, which was like a restorative process. It's a committee that is made of both a staff member and a student. We're holding a meeting with the person who's being late, you know, more than 4 times, and the teachers affected, and the parents if they want to come, and anyone who is affected. And then they would fill up a form where they will share the observations of each time I've been late, you know, what feelings were present for me around that, and why, you know, what happened. And then the teachers would also share the feelings that were present for them and the impact on them. And they will everyone would receive empathy as a first step, just being heard. And then the last phase would be just making requests and agreements
Yeah.
And sometimes it was very simple, you know, just text me, let me know that you're not gonna be on time so I can know. And that was it. And sometimes it was more than that. So when people felt that they matter and that they're being seen, they're being cared for, there was so much goodwill that was released to work out creative solutions.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see again and again that when connection is there, when the power dynamic is kind of being transformed.
Yeah. And I'm just so enjoying this idea that it comes from one step at a time. It first to the teachers, then to the students, then from them to other students, and now it's at the level of policy, and all of this in 3 years. That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
a straight up evaluation, but for me that's really amazing. I've noticed I'm feeling really inspired when I hear you say that, because it indicates that it's possible, and there are these
yeah,
resources available that we can get creative about.
yeah. I think we are at this phase. Like it's a combination of the time when the need is so big for this new approach, that you know the suffering, the pain, and the helplessness kind of opening the heart to embrace these tools and this consciousness. And it also was this particular group of people that were open to it and willing to step into vulnerability, because there's a lot of vulnerability with it.
And the presence of one skilled facilitator.
Yep.
It's just that part that's getting to me. It's one person who, because for your journey started with an inward seeking, and what a beautiful unfolding. And and it's not, you're not done unfolding. I know that there's a lot of exciting things you're going to be doing. But this is just for me such a, it's echoing, because in a number of the conversations we're having with people from the social sector, we're repeatedly hearing about how important it is to go within and find an inner connection to what we're doing, come from that space inside. And so far, maybe up till the last 5 or 6 years ago, I think I was just hearing this from the NVC community, at least in my own circles, but I'm hearing it increasingly from more and more people across the world. So I'm really just feel really hopeful at the idea that one skilled facilitator with the willingness to use what they have at their disposal could create so much change.
Yeah, thank you. I think it goes back to where we started, that longing to contribute. And since I was introduced to NVC, it was the first time after years and years and years of searching that I could see that I have now the tools to know what to do to embody that longing for wholeness, for peace, for care for the whole. And there was something special about it being my son's school too, because it was an opportunity for me to contribute to him and to contribute to, you know, to advocate for him and his friends. So I could feel empowered that I can do something, instead of usually just watching, you know, this impact on our kids and feeling so helpless and powerless, because it's always like, what can I do? Where do I start? You know, I'm such a small one person. You know, when we have these tools and consciousness, we're very powerful.
And I think this a certain degree of resilience and courage that it takes to stay open to that longing, that inner longing for contribution to one another, and the fact that we are human and that we are connected. It's a painful thing in different moments. It can be very joyful, but it's also sometimes quite painful. So that kind of courage and that kind of resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And oops, bless you. Yeah, and then they wanted to start integrating it into their curriculum. So now there are a couple of teachers I've been training to actually teach NVC and integrate it into their just the way of being in every interaction. And the principle you see in the film, he says that, it affected every interaction I have at every level.
Yeah.
Also one of the teachers in one of the scenes, she says, I brought it into how I teach. She's teaching their a play by Shakespeare,
right.
the Shakespeare play, and one of the characters is being late to his wedding. And so instead of the usual, she was like, okay, one of her students asked her, why is he being late? So she asked him, well, that's interesting. Why are you being late? Why are people being late? And then she said that led to a much deeper conversation, because that's what this consciousness does. It points us to the why. Why we do what we do, what we say, why we say what we say, with the assumption that there's always some beauty that motivates us.
I want to ask you something that is slightly outside of the NVC framework, because I'm going to ask you straight up for advice. For somebody who wants to work with young people or who wants to engage with the system, or for somebody who just has this longing to contribute, what could some pieces of advice be that they take back from this?
I have a list that I made for a session that I led recently in a NVC conference in China. And the title of the session was Empowering Kids in Domination Structures.
Right.
One of the first things is to integrate within myself this way of collaborative being, so that I can model it and embody it in every interaction I have, everywhere, because that's power. For me it was, let's say, teachers want to have like parent conferences, and at my school it was required that you would meet physically. You come to the school, and for me it's an hour drive for each direction. So I remember, asking my son's teacher to meet before Corona, to meet on Zoom. And she was like, no, that's school policy. We just do meetings, it's required that you come. And then through my NVC skills, empathizing with her, and then advocating for my needs, and making a clear request, and pulling her, like Marsha said, in her ears to hear me, she was willing. And this was just a small example of how I've done this so many times in interactions. Recently, a teacher was sending an email about sexual harassment, talking with the kids at 7th grade about sexual harassment, because they start telling each other things. And so I initiated a conversation with him to tell him about, my point of view about how to have this conversation. And so that's an example. When I have this clarity, I can start advocating within the system. And even if it's just small, shifts, it still goes a long way.
And that clarity,
the other thing,
from inner practice and continuing to model and embody this consciousness.
So I'm available, that I have enough self-connection, that I have enough capacity, that I have enough clarity, that I have enough skill, that I can model something. Because if I'm just asking for something that no one has seen, right? And it's not going to work.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then there is, I think another piece is repeatedly reflecting to our kids that there's nothing wrong with them if they don't adjust well to the system. Like there's so many parents that I work with who say, oh, my kids don't do the homework, they are so lazy.
Yeah.
So, if you just tell your kids there's nothing wrong with you that you don't want to do homework, of course you wouldn't want to do homework. No one wants to do something that they have to do.
Yeah.
And I feel sad, you know, that so many of us have to become oppressors, right? And make our kids do things they don't want to. So just having this message that the problem is not with you, the problem is in the system, that we all find ourselves in this setting.
Yeah.
That's huge, because that helps them maintain their perception of themselves as innocent,
Yeah.
and not as bad or wrong. So teach them how to use their own power to advocate for themselves within the system. Like I always like my idea is like Greta Thunberg, right? Like at 16, she's starting this Friday strikes for climate emergency. I mean, just one student, and then initiating this global movement. So even if you're oppressed, you still have power. And how to use the power to advocate for yourself, not in a rebellion way,
but as a kind of gracefully lived power, that this is what is true for me, and I put it to you very clearly.
Right.
Yeah.
Like for my son, with that initial story that I told, he decided to write about it to the school's newspaper,
Right.
newsletter, which was so empowering. For me, it was amazing that he was able to go public about it, and you know, and invite support for himself,
and to make sure that his voice is also heard in this entire mess. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, creating alternative systems, right, and alternative structures wherever you can. Like my other son, he's a sophomore, and for him, school is just so much suffering, he cannot do it. Like he tells me, this is so humiliating. You have to go to be at certain place at a certain time, and then to go for 8 hours from one room to another, to sit still in a chair, to listen and be so passive, and then go home after a day like this and then do homework for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Not doing this. And so we found another program for him, which is independent study. He's actually been able to learn so much more, doing work from home and engaging in the community. So to support our kids to exit the system and find another way that works for them, because I always tell my kids, you know, this is what we have. If you choose to make yourself do it, I will support you in that. It's sad, right? But that's what we have. And for my oldest child, you know, my older son who did the film, it wasn't that bad. He actually is very like enjoys academia, you know, intellectual.
Right. And so for him, that's an environment he could possibly engage with.
Yes.
For your younger kid, it sounds like it's just not, it's not life connecting. In fact, quite the opposite. And so
exactly.
that supporting him to make a different choice and standing with him is really important.
Exactly.
That goes back to think about there's nothing wrong with you. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Because so many times kids have, you know, they have this reality at school, and then at home they have more challenge and more, you know, hardship. So at least we can advocate for them and make it more possible for them to stay in choice and in power as much as possible. And then, you know, doing our grief work. Kind of that gap between where we are and where we want to be, and creating space to mourn, creating space to acknowledge our losses, to acknowledge that gap.
And it's interesting you say that now, because when I heard you say there's just this bit about making sure children know that there's nothing wrong with them, I have feeling there's some tears in my eyes, because there's a sense of, if every child was just told that there's nothing wrong with them, would we really have violence in the world? Would we have the kind of pain that we do? If we all knew that we were okay and that we mattered just as we are, and it's painful to think about. So I have a little grief coming up.
Yeah, I get that completely, because that's at the heart of our trauma.
Yeah.
Because we are being robbed from that sense of innocence, from that. And how can we love ourselves if our parents or teachers and caregivers deliver the message that there's something wrong with us? We have to believe them in order to survive and make sense of the world. And you know, Buddha said, if you truly loved yourself, you could never hurt another.
Yeah.
So that practice is we are restoring that with NVC.
Yeah.
With empathy.
And it's also something to take home, that as an adult or as a person with more power in any way in the field, to be able to, or engaging with life in any way, to be able to tell people that there's nothing wrong with you is a really, really critical.
Yes.
It's really powerful. Yeah.
Yes. And I've said it to my kids so many times, you know, and I work a lot with parents, and that's an ongoing, you know, it's almost present at every house. This struggle with homework, this struggle with school, it's stressful, and it goes such a long way when a parent is able to say, you know, there's nothing wrong with you, that you're not succeeding at school, or that you don't want to do your homework, or that you don't want to go to school, or that you hate school, or that instead of kind of,
you know, want to hug your girlfriend, or you want to kiss your girlfriend, there's nothing wrong with you for wanting these things. That's a really important thing.
Because it's distorted. You know, it's distorted, that we blame them for not doing something that they don't want to do, not doing something that they're being, you know, forced to do, not doing something that is not meaningful for them to do. We do it to ourselves too, all the time, right?
Yeah. And very often when I catch myself doing something like that, blaming or shaming myself, I'm hearing voices I would have heard as a student or as a younger person from adults, that, oh my God, look, it could be something as basic. I remember once I had it's small stuff, but it's little, it stays with you. I had, I think, 2 pieces of sandwich in my little tiffin box, and I remember a teacher looked at it and said, oh my God, are you really going to eat all that much bread? And I was 10 years old, and it's clear as dirt in my head. It's very, very clear that that particular tone of voice and that sense of shock that I could be that hungry. And
it's I call it like a moment of a loss of innocence. Like in that moment, you lost your innocence.
Yeah.
Because there was that implying that there's something wrong with you. While before that, you were just you, right?
Yeah, no matter how, I mean, the bread had nothing to do with my existence at all. It was just something to eat.
And suddenly you become aware that, you know, there is too much or too little, or and I think that also as parents we have all this conditioning and brainwash about, you know, you have to make your kid go to school and do well, because that's what good parent does, and that's where they're going to have choice and go to college and succeed in life and earn a lot of money. And that's such an hypnosis that, you know, we experience so much anxiety around that as parents, so that there's a lot of work of liberation that we need to do internally to be able to stand, you know, outside this hypnosis and advocate for our kids. It's really, it's really intense. There is the adverse childhood experiences score, right? The ACE score. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think I've heard about it. I don't think I've explored it very deeply though.
No, there just have like 10, you know, examples of trauma, like, you know, neglect or physical abuse, emotional abuse, if you experience divorce, if one of your parents was in prison, and you get, you know, if one of these is a yes, then you accumulate points, and they say that like 1 out of 6 people have more than 4 points, which then affects your lifespan. Like you would have less 20 years in average from a certain point going upward. And I was thinking like this trauma of being judged and being shamed and being punished and being not experiencing that you matter, not experience that your needs, this is adverse experience of childhood, and it's not on the scale. Like you have to have like something really dramatic, like to count as trauma. But just being judged, just being told that you're wrong, just being threatened or demanded or be made do things you don't want to do, for me is trauma for humans, because it's out of integrity with our souls.
Yeah. And it's also that if we count that and if we see that as trauma, that would be shared trauma across the human race. I don't think there's anybody who grows up outside of that system at this point. We all can.
Right. It's collective trauma. And then going back to working with schools, kids' brains are being affected by this language,
right,
by the way we communicate. And we can have an impact on their brain's development.
Yeah.
Direct impact, just by the way we talk and respond. And so that's a lot of power. And I think I told you about my project with Warner Brothers Media. That
you did. And I want to hear more. Please.
I'm saying that because it's connected to working with preschool. I'm doing 2 preschool shows with them. Well, I'm not writing the shows, they're writers to the shows, but I'm writing the learning goals for these shows.
Yeah.
And then I'm reading all the scripts and offering them feedback about the language, but also about the consciousness. Like these are the most frontline enlightened people in humanity that are trying to do good in the world. And yet, it's very rare that people know how to offer empathy. And so just to integrate empathy into these dialogues is shifting everything. And this is going to go to millions of houses.
Yes.
These shows. I mean, I'm just one consultant, and the projects, they have many, many people involved. So I don't know what the level of impact will be, but I'm confident it will have an impact. Yeah. And or this consciousness of impact, of if I'm an adult, I have power in this relationship, and how do I use this power? And when I use power, whatever I say to kids has so much more power than if I say it to you, because I can deliver consequences. Absolutely,
because I have power in that relationship.
Exactly, and they are dependent on me.
Yes.
So just bringing awareness to that. And I said that I think that kids are one of the population on earth that is the most oppressed. No one knows what's happening in the houses, And Marshall said that we will never talk to our kids the way we talk to our neighbors. Like there's something that we allow ourselves to talk to our kids. Sometimes the way we talk to our pets. So bringing light to that, there's it feels like sacred work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine the impact of these principles in popular media, even just the idea that we can listen to each other, that we can be with one another, we can hold what's really true, the intensity of what comes up, and validate the experience rather than judging the experience or dismissing it. Just threads of that in something colorful and bright that people can watch would be beautiful. I can imagine that would be life altering. And we actually know that from Ted Rogers' work. how powerful it can be to have just that awareness in popular media.
Yes, and I think we're so off from it that we don't even know how it looks like.
Yeah. Okay. It may not be as colorful as I imagined, but I'm going to assume it will be.
No, I mean that in regular kind of mainstream society,
Yeah.
we have the need for love. We feel the love, but we don't know how love looks like in terms of what we say and what we do. We think that if we tell our kids, you should be nice to your sister, that's love. Right? So there is a lot of confusion, but every time we say you should without empathizing with, why is he not being nice to his sister? What's going on for them? And letting go of that right wrong thinking.
Yeah.
Like we try to bring good, but then we create trauma.
Yeah.
And there is so much more to it, like all the pieces of even all the games in these shows, the games that people that kids play,
Yeah.
all these competitive games, and win-lose games.
Yeah.
Shifting from that, it's huge.
That is huge. I have a memory of being in a win-win game where everybody got to play and nobody was. This is part of this Play for Peace movement in India, so they ran a game, and I, as a child, I could not run as fast as the other children, so I was rarely included. But in this game, I got to be a banana, and I think I got to be a peeler. It was a lot of fun, and because we were doing this in a conscious space, it also almost immediately released quite a lot of the trauma around exclusion.
Wow.
And it's really transformative to physically kind of experience that degree of I matter, I'm part of this, I'm running around like everybody else, even if I can't run all that fast.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so that's a hopeful thing, right? Because we can experience healing no matter what trauma we've been through. Yeah. Our brains are elastic, and once we have an experience that is different, having that experience is healing. Yeah. And it changes the brain.
It also changes the brain, exactly. Just as trauma can impact the brain, healing can impact the brain. And I'm hearing that, and I'm getting that this, for me, this is exemplifying the value of this work, or the value of empathy in any field, but particularly while working with children, particularly while working with people who have less power. So I'm going to gently bring us to the end of this conversation. I want to check, is there anything you'd like to say before we close? Anything you want to share before we bring this to a close?
I want to say thank you to you for creating this opportunity for me to talk about this project and share it with the world, and for all the work that you're doing in Living Bridges. And yeah, just bring that, we started with the gap of where we are, if where we're gonna go, and that longing, and just bring compassion and tenderness for that gap, and for all of us trying to move towards the vision. It's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect, but it feels like, we each taking our little bit of it. And I want to, express my gratitude to my son, Michael, who I kept telling him, we have to document this because this is so special, and I want the world to know. And so I'm grateful that he was willing and able. He's a young filmmaker, to put his talent into this. There have been like amazing responses from all over the world about it, and many people tell me, when we go to schools, we want to show them, something.
Yes.
Of what's possible and how the impact of NVC. So that definitely helps that you have something to show. And that was my intention and hope with that.
And it really supports us as well, because really this, for me, it's about what's emerged, and what was very inspiring is it was one skilled practitioner willing to make do with what you had. And I say this because so many people who come to the Living Bridges workshops are just starting out. We live in India, most of us, which is a fairly hierarchical society. So it's very, very easy to get demotivated by the idea of, how does this apply in the real world? How do I take it home?
Right.
I really somewhere want to highlight that it is possible. And that,
Yes.
and it comes from this, it's possible, and that it comes from this deep inner longing to contribute to each other's well-being.
It's very important that we document what we do in the world and all these experiments, so that now with the internet, when everyone can see it all over the world, within, instantly. So that's important. And and also that, again, going back to Marshall, where he said, this consciousness is not, designed to just radiate as a beautiful picture, sitting in a cave and meditating, but it has to result in an action. Like, it's not like it has to result. We want it to result in an action, with each of us asking, okay, now that we've integrated this, what do we want to do? What do we want to say? And each of us has,
how do we make life wonderful now from this space of connection?
Right. And that's why I'm not satisfied just teaching NVC and workshops and retreats and online classes. I really love, going, implementing. And I think that's how we grow our impact.
Absolutely. And I can really resonate with that. For me, the practice and the process came alive when it was in relation to what's going on in the world, and it was alive. And
when I went to this meeting with the principal, I didn't know what will come out of it. I was just seeing an opportunity and showed up for it. And every time I was like, okay, I'm going to show up to the next opportunity, because I didn't even believe that it will, grow into this multi-year project. Also from my experience, working in systems before. So just take every step at a time and bring the full presence into what's in front of us.
I think that's a beautiful moment to close. That brings us to the close.
Thank you, Manasi.
Thank you so much, Aya, for doing this. And thank you, everybody who's watching this. This is part of our fundraising effort. So there will be some slides after this. We would love to invite your support, financial or otherwise, towards the work that we're doing, which has to do with bringing principles of empathy, compassion, and collaboration to the social sector, and information and learning from the social sector to these inward-oriented processes. So we hope that you'll support us, and thank you for joining in.